Mr. Mary, the clashes have intensified on the contact line between the Azerbaijani and Armenian armed forces. In the past, such confrontations have occurred sporadically. Is this time different? Is there any cause for concern?
Well, there is always cause for concern when you have shootings across a very delicate and disputed line of contact as between Karabakh and the occupied territories and Azerbaijan. Whether this is different, I can't say. I'm inclined to be a bit cynical that in the past, whenever there's been a scheduled high-level meeting between leaders of the two countries, whenever there's been even the appearance of any diplomatic progress on the issue of Karabakh, there have often tended to be shootouts on the line of contact. I think diplomats almost expect that now on this issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. Hopefully this is only what we would unfortunately now call routine violence between the two sides. I hate to use that term routine because not only does it lead to young men in uniform being hurt or killed, but sometimes, of course, it results in civilians being hurt or killed, and either is entirely unjustifiable.
You have written extensively about the security situation in South Caucasus, and you have done some assessment of the military capacities of Azerbaijani and Armenian armed forces. What do you think would a hypothetical conflict, military conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia look like?
It would certainly not look like the war that took place 20 years ago. That was largely an infantry war with some armor, some artillery, and a little bit of air power. This would be a much more munitions-intensive conflict. Both sides now have very large stockpiles of long-range weaponry, of new high-technology equipment. Both sides would be trying to hit the other from a distance a great deal in order to try to spare their own manpower, particularly their infantry manpower. It is, however, difficult to bring such a conflict to a resolution unless you actually have an engagement between the ground forces, the armed combat forces, the infantry of the two sides. So a real question would be, what would the two sides seek to achieve in a new war? Would they simply want to have a short period of throwing artillery and bombs at each other with the expectation that the great powers would then in some way diplomatically intervene to bring it to a halt? Or would one or the other side in a new war really want to bring the conflict to a military conclusion, to a military resolution, to win? To do that, you would have to escalate the conflict to a much higher level, which would involve crossing borders. It would include invading the other side's territory. It would include inflicting very large losses on the other side's civilian population, with the inevitability of retaliation on the civilian population of your own country, and could get out of hand in a hurry. I think one has to recognize that the military equipment that the two sides have today puts the potential for a very bloody, very destructive conflict very much on the table. Whether that would be in any way a decisive conflict in a political sense, I very much doubt. I think the two sides are not at the same level of equipment, but they're not at the same level of military skills. I think both sides tend to overrate their own capabilities and tend to underrate the other side. So it's very difficult to know how the actual combat of such a conflict would progress. That's true in any war. But that such a war would be decisive for either side, I think is very doubtful. But such a conflict could be a huge defeat for both sides. That's very, very much a prospect.
They say that nations usually learn the wrong lesson from the last war. Do you believe that the Armenian and Azerbaijani societies have proper awareness, understanding of the kind of conflict that might take place, the kind of conflict that you just described?
Oh no, I think particularly on the Armenian side, there is an expectation that a new war would result in a quick, easy, and cheap Armenian victory. I think the Armenian side very significantly underrates the capacity of the military of Azerbaijan today. I'm not so familiar with public thinking in Azerbaijan on that, though my impression is that the leadership, the political leadership of Azerbaijan, feels a very considerable sense of renewed confidence in its military because of the amount of money that has been spent buying new high technology equipment and modern weaponry. I would caution them that high-tech weaponry is not the same thing as military capability. But I suspect that Azerbaijan's military and political leadership today perhaps overrate their own capacities and have a higher degree of confidence about how they would perform than may really be justified. But the Armenian side, I think, significantly underrates how much improvement has taken place militarily on the Azerbaijani side.
What could we say about the geopolitical factors in the region? Now, we know that when there's a conflict in Georgia with regard to South Ossetia, we saw the Russian intervention take place. And there's a lot of speculation on the Azerbaijani side that the Russians have active military base in Armenia. And in the case of resumption of military conflict, the Russians would intervene. The same way with regard to Turkey, there's a concern on the Armenian side that Turkey and Azerbaijan have close military ties. So what would you have to say about the geopolitical factors?
First, I see no indication whatsoever that Russia wants to see a renewal of armed conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. If anything, the Russians are overly committed to the preservation of the status quo, both military and political. Certainly, if Armenia and Azerbaijan want to get the attention of the great powers of the world, going to war is one way to do that. It's not a very intelligent way to do it, but it is a way to do it. And certainly there is the problem that in a renewed conflict, the mutual client-patron relationships that exist between Armenia and Russia, between Azerbaijan and Turkey, would significantly complicate things. Now, I do not for a moment believe that Turkey and Russia would engage in a conflict with each other over this issue. I think that's just preposterous. I do think, however, that both Armenia and Azerbaijan would seek to maneuver their respective great power patrons in order to create pressure on their immediate allies. Armenia would seek to use its patron, Russia, to complicate the military and strategic situation for Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan obviously would seek to use its influence in Ankara to do the same thing to Armenia. How that would play out, of course, depends on decisions that would be made in Moscow and Ankara. And I would like to think that statesmen and leaders in Russia and in Turkey understand perfectly well that their respective client states do not have the interests of the two regional great powers at heart. They're seeking to manipulate and use those great powers. So I think one should expect that governments in both Ankara and Moscow are going to be very reluctant to get dragged into a renewed conflict. That doesn't mean, however, that their patron-client relationships with the two conflicting powers are not going to make a renewed war in the Central Caucasus potentially much more dangerous than was the one that took place 20 years ago. I think that is certainly true.
Mr. Mary, you've been blacklisted by the Azerbaijani government after your travel to Nagorno-Karabakh. The Azerbaijani authorities have banned you from visiting the country. Do you have any comment with regard to that decision?
Well, first, any government has the sovereign right to deny visas to any foreigner it wants. I don't deny that Azerbaijan has that right. I do think this policy is unwise for the interests of Azerbaijan. My suggestion is that when foreigners, whether they be from the United States or Europe or Russia, or many countries, where I think there are over 380 people who are on this blacklist now, including members of various parliaments and some very prestigious performing arts people, that when someone like that visits Nagorno-Karabakh, what Baku should do is immediately and publicly invite that person to Azerbaijan, publicly to challenge that person to go to Azerbaijan and see the Karabakh situation from the Azerbaijani side, from the Azerbaijani point of view. Baku should reach out and engage these people. If a person then publicly refuses to visit Azerbaijan, publicly refuses to let Azerbaijan show its side of the dispute, then putting a person like that on a visa blacklist might make some sense. But for Azerbaijan to refuse to engage people who have been engaged by Armenia merely isolates Azerbaijan. I mean, I can tell you very truthfully that in Armenia, they think this Azerbaijani policy is wonderful. They're laughing at Baku because of this, because it helps to isolate Azerbaijan and gives Armenia a boost in its own propaganda. I mean, it's really quite an ill-advised policy. I've been personally going to Azerbaijan for over 30 years. I've been to the country a number of times. Always enjoyed visiting it. I'm now in a situation in which I've been to Armenia 3 times in recent years without once visiting Azerbaijan. That makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. I would personally prefer to balance my visits to Armenia with visits to Azerbaijan. But for the time being, because of this policy in Baku, I cannot. And I don't see how that benefits Azerbaijan.
Mr. Mary, if you were to be able to go to Azerbaijan, what would be your research interest? Where would you like to go inside Azerbaijan?
Well, my actual area of interest would not involve Karabakh directly. I mean, I've written a lot on Karabakh in recent years, and it's obviously an important issue. But the one part of the country that has fascinated me for decades, actually, is Nakhchivan. That's part of Azerbaijan that's almost totally unknown in the outside world. And that's one that I would like to visit so that I could write about it and explain to people in Washington where Nakhchivan is, why it's important, why the economic development and the security of Nakhchivan play an important role in any resolution of the dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and indeed between Armenia and Turkey. Normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey could be of great benefit economically for Nakhchivan. But at the moment, I think it's fair to say that almost no one from the United States ever sets foot in Nakhchivan. So because of that, it's relatively unknown here in Washington, and I would like to try to correct that if I ever get the chance to go.